Mac Power Users, episode 591, HyperCard All the Way Down with Adam Engst. Welcome to Mac Power Users. I'm David Sparks and joined by my co-host, Mr. Stephen Hackett. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, David. How are you?
I am excellent. This is WWDC Eve as we release the show. That means tomorrow we're going to get some Christmas presents to unwrap from our friends at Apple. And we were thinking about who would be a good guest to have on WWDC Eve. Why not our friend Adam Engst? Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, well, I feel embarrassed we haven't had you on more often. Adam is the publisher of the longest running newsletter in Macland. Writer of many books. You know, we had Tanya on the show. I believe you've been on the Mac Power Users, but it's been years now. So thanks for coming back.
Yeah. And I must admit, the whole Christmas thing on Christmas Eve, I'm like, oh, I don't know. Do I have to dress for it? Do I need the red suit or something? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would have been nice if you showed up in a Santa hat. I'm a little disappointed, but I guess we'll get over it.
You don't have video, but normally you'd see I have a 4-foot tall blow-up emperor penguin behind me, and at Christmas he does in fact wear a Santa hat. So if you'd gotten me, at the right time of year, I would have been able to pull one off and show it to you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, as we can continue making these podcasts, our hair at least continues to look more and more like Santa's. So.
Yeah, it was. I once ran a race with some friends who were also in their 50s, and we took a selfie, and my friend showed it to his daughter, who was, I don't know, 15 or something like that, and she's like, "Is Adam the one with the Santa hair?" And I'm like, "No, I did not need to know that."
Yeah, that's some rough feedback.
It is true, though. WWDC for me is like the moment of peak optimism every year for Apple, because you get in that reality distortion field. They just make announcement after announcement. There's something about the software updates that gets to me even more than the hardware updates. And I love it. So, as this show publishes tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Pacific, Apple's going to have their big keynote. And we're going to talk later about, kind of our thoughts heading into WWDC this year. But the real focus of today's show is Adam's workflows, because Adam is a very busy guy and he's got some really useful workflows.
Mm-hmm. I do want to say real quick before we move into that next week's episode 592, will be out a few days early. Everyone knows we normally publish on Sundays, but we want to get the WWDC show out a little bit early, so look for that hopefully Thursday or Friday next week. Be sure to follow along on Twitter or in the forum. We'll let everybody know when that's up.
Yeah, we don't want to put it out immediately after the keynote. We want to give it a few days so Stephen and I can do some research, but we're going to have thoughts on the announcements, and we're going to get it to you early. All right, Adam, so let's start a little bit. I would imagine a lot of our audience already knows you, but for those who don't, Adam is the proprietor of TidBITs.com. When did you first start TidBITs?
April of 1990.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
which I didn't think that used to be all that long ago, but now I start counting back. So yeah, we're at 31 years now, which is unthinkable.
Yeah.
Just utterly unimaginable.
I mean, it's such an amazing run. I know there are a lot of us. I won't tell you how old I was when you started, but there are a lot of us who grew up super interested in the Mac, and TidBITs has been like this ever-present companion for so many of us to keep up with what's going on with Apple, but also the ecosystem around it. I mean, really, it is. It's just incredible to me.
It's fun every now and then. I go back and sort of look at very old issues, and keep in mind when we started, that was the days of the weeklies like Mac Week and InfoWorld and PC Week, and it was just such a different world, and TidBITs was faster and more nimble and had many more voices than Mac Week. I mean, we loved Mac Week, don't get me wrong. But that was, sort of what we were trying to do something different than. And it's been telling that over the decades, we've now, I think, become, the staid, elder statesman of the industry compared to what we were back in the day.
Yeah, and also, like the Mac rumor stuff wasn't as big of a deal in 1990. Back then the Mac rumor was, are the doors still open? That was the rumor.
Well, there was there was the Mac the Knife column at the back of Mac Week, and there were rumors in that every day or every week, but it was different somehow. And part of it was that I guess real stuff leaked, and Apple didn't have nearly as much control over its communications. And I don't know, it felt like there was a reason for it more. Like you really needed to know what was coming up because you were making purchasing decisions. And if Apple was going to release, a new Mac in 6 months, you cared very deeply that you were not going to buy the wrong thing. Nowadays, it doesn't feel like it's quite as big a deal. You might want to know, but I don't get the feeling that people are hanging on those rumors as a way of adjusting their corporate budgets the way they used to.
Although I do wish they would just kind of turn some cards over as to these Apple Silicon Macs to say, this is what we're doing and this is when they're coming out. Because, we're going to find out more hopefully tomorrow, but I feel like there's still going to be some cards that haven't been turned over after tomorrow. And that makes it rough.
Yeah. And particularly, it does seem, we'll talk about more about this, but, it does seem they're kind of pushing off the higher performance machines. Those are the ones going to take the longest. And so if you're in that world, you're in the, video processing, whatever, high-end audio world where you desperately need as much power as you can. Yeah, you care about when those are coming out because it's affecting what you buy when.
So Adam, what computers are on your desk at this point?
Well, I'm sitting here looking at a 2020 27-inch iMac, which I was very happy to purchase last August because before then I'd been working on a 2014 27-inch iMac, which had served me well until its SSD died, and I had to replace it. First I booted from an external SSD for a while, and then after I bought the 2020, I got the guts up to cut the screen off and replace the SSD in the old Mac. So, but I've always worked on this, since 2014, one of these 27-inch iMacs with a 27-inch Thunderbolt display next to it. The Thunderbolt display has to sit on one of my books to be up to the right height because it's just, I cannot imagine why Apple will not ever give us a height adjustable Mac or monitor.
Oh, they will. It's just $7,000.
Whereas I can use a copy of, let's see, the AT&T WorldNet Web Discovery Guide that I wrote in 1996.
I like that.
To bring it right up to that, 1.2 inches higher. Yeah. And that gets the bottom of the display is to be exactly the right spot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a decent monitor. I just wish it was a Retina monitor.
Have you always been a desktop guy?
I have always been a desktop guy, and I've always been a multiple monitor guy. I ran two monitors, starting with an SE30.
Wow.
And an Apple, I don't know what they called it, RGB display. I think it was the Apple RGB display, the 13-inch color. And so, yeah, so that was a very, very long time ago, but in fact, probably 91, and with a monitor card in the SE30. And keep in mind, the SE30, of course, had the tiny little 512 by 384 monochrome screen.
Yeah.
So bringing a 12 or 13-inch, I think it was a 13-inch color display onto that was just such a big deal. And ever since then, I have been addicted to the concept of having multiple things open on multiple screens.
So do you have like a structure for that? I think most people that have multiple screens kind of have I don't know if philosophy is the right word, but just
yes.
a protocol. What does your brain expect on the left screen versus the right screen?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, the right screen has to be the computer. And well, I shouldn't say that. The right screen has to be the main monitor that has the menu bar so that the Apple menu is in the middle.
Okay.
And that way I'm looking at the menus, right? They're in the middle of this huge extended desktop.
Yeah.
The dock is over on the right side. I'm not a big dock user, so I don't really care. Yes, see? We're
correct
right.
side.
Correct side.
Well, especially if you've got a monitor on the other side, you don't want to hit the dock on your way over.
Right, precisely. The dock shouldn't be in the middle. The bottom never makes sense for the dock because then it takes away from functional space.
Yes.
So
Oh man, we are cut from the same cloth. I'm so
there
glad
we
to hear
go.
this.
You know what? I've been doing an experiment lately, guys, where I just put the dock at the bottom and hit it. And I just almost never need to look at it anyway. And it's kind of nice just having it off the screen.
So I will say that would probably be more of a big deal if I didn't have as much horizontal space.
Yeah.
But the fact is, with 227s, the far left and far right edges are not super useful.
Yeah.
It's far enough away that I have to turn my head, I have to refocus, all that. So having the dock over there is useful to be able to see it on occasion, but I'm not touching it all the time anyway. And I'm more of a launch bar, command tab kind of guy, keyboard app switcher person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly just reference to be able to look at the dock. So then, for instance, I always have my email on the right-hand monitor, front and center, because my email is the most important thing I do. And I always have 2 stacked Finder windows on the right-hand side of the left monitor. So they're kind of in the middle too. And then overlaying them when I want to use it is my web browser window.
Sure.
So I can always switch back and forth. And your listeners will love this, I'm sure, but and I think this is still true. I've had a Keyboard Maestro macro, I think it is. I can't even remember when I did this last. It was basically when I click on the desktop, the Finder windows come to the front, because that's the easiest way for me to get to the Finder, and I don't want my Finder windows, to stay behind whatever is in front of them.
Okay.
And so, but I think that's something I do in Keyboard Maestro, but that was something I set up years ago, basically, on Finder activation, bring its windows to the front.
Yeah, I think that's the only app I can think of where you could do that, short of writing an Apple script. So you're probably...
Yeah. And because that desktop is such a big target to click on.
Yeah.
And so that's really handy. But that way, by having the 2 stacked Finder windows, it's easier for me to copy from one to the other. I can also see different things. So like right now I'm looking at it, and one is showing my downloads folder and the other is showing some projects that I have due tomorrow. So, it's very much stuff I'm working on right now. Downloads folder gets used a lot because that's where screenshots come into from the iPhone, obviously anything I download, stuff like that. So that tends to be a destination for me.
Now, do you sit, because I've done multi-monitors in the past, and the only way I've ever been able to make it work is if I sit in the center of one of them. I cannot sit in the center of that line. You know what I mean?
Yes. So first of all, I work on a standing desk, so I'm standing all the time. But probably the thing for you to imagine is that my keyboard is like the left side of my keyboard almost matches up with the left side of the right-hand monitor. So it's not quite centered. I'm not quite centered on it. I'm nudged to the left. So, but yes, I feel like I'm centered on that the window that's going to be the primary window on my right-hand monitor.
So that's kind of your working computer, the right one.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's so the 2 things that I said, the mail's there. The other thing that's there is whatever I'm writing. So when I'm in Google Docs or BB Edit, something like that, that will be on the right-hand monitor in that kind of nudge to the center position of importance. And the other reason for that, actually, just to be clear, is that I've got my dock way over on the right, but I can also see all my Finder icons over there. So, and I always have my desktop set to sort by last modified. So the most recently created modified file is always sitting there under my drives, and it's always visible, almost always visible, because nothing overwrites it on that far right.
Nice. And then the left one is like your reference monitor.
Yeah, so as I said, it's got those Finder windows, it's got the web browser, it's got messages stuffed over on the far side. I don't have it showing all the time, but that's where Fantastical takes over the entire screen for my calendar.
Oh, have you ever done the trick with Fantastical, entire screen, but week view with 14 days? That's golden.
Week view with 14 days.
Yeah,
I
because
have
Fantastic
not.
Al can view more than 7 days in week view. So I put that up on the full screen with 14 days, and I can plan out for 2 weeks. It is like it's like being in the center of NORAD.
I was like, I'm going to have to check this. Oh, yeah, days per week, 14 days. Okay, I'm trying this right now. Oh, that's an interesting something. I'll have to look at that. I will admit, I'm not a highly scheduled person.
Sure.
In terms of like what happening during the day. So for me, the month view is what I've always defaulted to, because I can usually just see my my reminders as well as my events in that. But I don't know. I'll try it. I mean, that's that's the only way you learn these things is someone says, "Hey, what about such and such?" And you're like, "Oh, that's a good idea. I'll have to give it a try."
What about inputs? Are you a trackpad guy, a mouse guy?
Oh, I'm weirder than anyone.
All right.
I use a Contour Designs Roller Mouse Pro.
All right. That's the one like the old football game in the arcades, right? Where it's a big ball.
No, it's a track bar. So
What?
it's a rolling it's a bar that slides back and forth, and then it rotates as well. So you get back and forth as a left-right motion, and rolling is a up-down motion, and you combine them and you get the full motion. And then below the track bar, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buttons and a scroll wheel.
All right, give me the name again. I have to look at this.
Contour Designs Roller Mouse Pro. And it sits right below your keyboard with palm rests. So that it's a little bit like the trackpad on a laptop, which I like. I like to have my thumbs below the keyboard when I'm not typing for moving.
I have never seen this before. I never even knew something like this existed.
My work here is done.
Yeah.
So no, this thing is really strange, but I love it. The only real downside is you lose extreme precision if you care about pixel level stuff in graphics.
Yeah.
So it's fast, it's accurate, but it's not as precise as a mouse or a trackpad is. What I like about it is that the thing just moves with a fingertip really easily. And it allows me to keep my hands, on the keyboard and come back off of it very comfortably.
I want to describe this for the listeners that are driving down the freeway. It is it's like a traditional palm rest that you put under your keyboard, but it's got like wheels and rollers, and I mean, you have to look at this when you get to wherever you're driving right now, because I can't even describe it that well. It's got looks like a little mouse, like like if you had a little mouse and he was going to run on a treadmill, it's like got a little mouse treadmill in there. What?
It's like something you'd see in a movie. It's like the future of computing. It's like this is what they had right before Minority Report happened.
Yes, this is like steampunk input devices.
Yes.
If the movie was made in 1980, so
this is what you would have. So how's the Mac OS support on this? Like, this seems really unusual.
It's all standard buttons and scroll wheels and things like that.
How do you go side to side? I see that. So you scroll.
So the bar slides left and right.
Oh, wow.
So what you can run into trouble sometimes is when you get the bar. So if you get the bar all the way to one edge and your mouse and your pointer isn't to the edge you want to get to, you have to kind of keep pushing or back up and push a little harder, because it obviously is constrained in that range. It can rotate infinitely, but it can only go left and right so far before it hits the edges. So I've used one of these for many years at this point. I would actually have to go back to find out how long, but I have actually bought, I think this is my second one, and I'm actually considering buying another one just because it's starting to get so old and worn looking that I'm a little worried that it will fail and the company will have gone away. So maybe I should get another one while I can.
Yeah, put 5 of them in a closet just in case.
Yeah, and to get back to your question about how it interacts with macOS, it does fine. I mean, basically, it's a standard pointing device and standard extra buttons and things like that. So anything you can do that lets you program buttons, like Keyboard Maestro or whatnot, will work. various times in the past, there was, oh gosh, I'm blanking on it. I know the guy's name, Alessandro Levi Montalcini. And what was his app? USB Overdrive.
Okay.
USB Overdrive allowed you to control any USB input device in every imaginable way. And so at various times over the history of my using these things, which has probably been 15 plus 20 years, I don't know exactly, maybe even more, I've used USB Overdrive to like adjust the tracking and make it faster or slower and that kind of thing.
I am super tempted to try one of these just for a week, just for the experience of it. I can't get over it.
It does take a little getting used to. I will say, like Mike, Tanya, this is the best way to keep someone off your Mac. Like, they come and they look at it and they're like, "But where's the mouse? How do I?" And you show them and they touch it. They're like gingerly with a finger and like Tanya hates having to use my Mac, so it's a great way to ensure that no one messes with your stuff.
Well, we have made over 500 episodes of Mac Powders, and this is by far the weirdest input device I have ever heard of on the show.
Well, I will say it's not the weirdest I've ever used.
Uh-oh. So, okay, now you're going to tell me.
So this is way back in the 90s, I think. I was having trouble with carpal tunnel syndrome, and that's where a lot of this stuff came from, is repetitive stress, desire to use different stuff for repetitive stress injuries. And for a while, I was using a cording keyboard with, I think, a trackball, normal like Kensington trackball, but I had a foot button. I had a button that I could click with my foot, which was great, right? Because the problem with when you've got RSI issues, the problem is pushing and holding. And so I would move the trackball with my hand, the finger, and that was great. And then I would click with my foot and hold with my foot to drag. And that was brilliant.
Yeah.
So that was ADB level stuff. So that was so long ago. That did not survive.
Yeah.
I think that's long gone. But it was actually a pretty useful approach, right? Because it's sort of the same thing like you do why you use your feet when you're driving a car. Because you can coordinate that perfectly well. Your body does that really, really nicely. And it allowed, again, avoiding, because the problem, and this is even more so with mice, right? The problem is that when you're pushing into a surface, it's bad. It does bad things to the muscles in your arm. You're fighting yourself. And so to be able to eliminate that part of it with a click foot, the foot button was nice.
Yeah, I had some friends that were heavy into music that used those foot buttons for some of the music production stuff they were doing. And I think that's what they were really made for. But yeah, why not,
Yeah.
All right. So you've got the big iMac, you've got the big extra screen, and do you even own a laptop?
I do. And I mean, as much as I am very much a desktop guy and, I want all those pixels, I do go on trips and like to work in the living room sometimes and things like that. So I've always had a laptop. For me, it's just it's an auxiliary machine, and I'm currently rocking an M1 based MacBook Air, which is an amazing, amazing machine, I have to say.
Yeah.
It replaced a 2012 MacBook Air, to be fair. So, it didn't have a lot of competition, put it that way. But yeah, and to that end, like because the laptops for me are always travel machines or secondary machines, I always go for light and inexpensive.
Yeah.
I'm never getting the 16-inch MacBook Pros or anything like that because I just don't need it. Like whatever. I'm on a conference. I need to be able to check my email.
Mm-hmm.
Are you an iPad guy?
I have an iPad. Let's see. I use the iPad when I'm sick to watch Netflix.
Okay.
Does that count?
So you're not an iPad guy.
I'm not an iPad guy. No,
Yeah.
I'm not. And I have to say, I feel like I've given it the old college try on several occasions. I have a 10.5-inch iPad Pro with the smart keyboard and the Apple Pencil. I occasionally find things that are absolutely brilliant on the iPad. So, for instance, recently for a race I was organizing, I needed to send a sketch of a trail course to the State Department of Environmental Conservation for a permit. Well, the absolute best way to do that is to pull a PDF into an iPad and sketch over it in markup with an Apple Pencil. Mm-hmm. That is the best way to do it, bar none. But for almost everything else I do, the iPad is just not as good. I mean, it's not as good a word processor. It's not as good an email platform. It's not as good a web browser, and it's just not as good in every way. And I'm not saying it's bad, but what I can do on particularly my 2020 Mac or even the MacBook Air is just so much more flexible, so much faster. I can never justify using the iPad over the MacBook Air when I'm traveling.
Yeah, it's very good at niche things and sometimes not so good at everyday things.
And I keep wanting to. I mean, like, I feel badly about it. I keep, Apple has these ads, and I'm like, I want to be the guy who's fixing the wind turbine up at the top of that pole with my custom iPad app or something. But it turns out I don't do that. I write stuff, and I post stuff on websites, and I download images, and I edit them, and I just can't. I can't bring myself to use it. And
well, hopefully Apple gives you another reason to try tomorrow. Hopefully,
and they could also do a lot more on the multitasking side of things. I can't even remember the controls to get split screen and that kind of stuff going. It's like it's just never useful enough. It's fast enough to switch full apps. So the times when I do want to see two apps at once, I have to go look it up, which just seems really wrong.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by our friends over at 1Password. We all know about 1Password being the best way to store our passwords and other secure information on our computers. It all syncs seamlessly with our phones and tablets, but also our PCs that we may be using. I've got a PC here in my office, and I use 1Password on it. It all syncs perfectly. And they've really rolled out some great improvements, including Touch ID and Windows Hello support in the browser version of 1Password. So if 1Password is locked and you have the desktop app installed, you can now use those biometric authentication either on your Mac or your PC right from the browser. Also comes with a beautiful new dark mode in the browser. Looks really awesome, really great. And they've updated the saving experience. Lots of polish in this most recent version of 1Password. That's really what they do. You would think a password manager would be kind of a static thing. They really work on it day in and day out to make it better, more secure, and faster. So if you need a password manager, and you do, head on over to 1password.com/MPU to learn more. There you can sign up for a free 30-day trial. And when you sign up, you'll get 20% off. Once again, that's 1password.com/MPU. And our thanks to 1Password for their continuing support of the show.
Adam, you said your most important work is your email. That was curious to me. So but I guess you are really running a group of people to keep everything going at TidBITs. And and you did all that great work with the Take Control series, and you've just done a lot of that collaboration. So I would imagine email is pretty important to you. So share some wisdom with us. What's the email app of choice for Adam Engst, and how do you pull that off?
Can I say anything but Apple Mail? No. I have never liked Apple Mail.
Sure.
I do not use it. I've never used it. Seriously. Obviously it's on my Macs at all times. But I was a Eudora guy back in the day. I wrote a book about Eudora. So I really, really liked Eudora, and I feel like I have been searching ever since. And many years ago, I switched to Gmail. And in the web interface. And what I liked about it is that it was the first rethinking of what email was. And, putting that Google slant of everything is search onto email really worked for me, because I do not like touching my email repeatedly. I don't like filing things. I don't like having to sort through stuff to find things. I like doing searches. And works in my brain. I'm very good at searching, and I have no trouble coming up with the keywords that will find pretty much any message I need at any time. So I have changed numerous times over the years, various different email apps. Most recently, actually, I started using Spark. And I liked Spark quite a lot. They did some very nice things. I like the UI. I like the fact that it worked on both Mac and iPhone. But they had one real problem, which is I'm an unread guy. So when I see a message and I need to come back to deal with it, I mark it as unread.
Okay.
I know there's other systems. I know there's this, that, the other thing. There's the inbox zero. There's the, getting things done, putting it in a list, blah, blah, blah. Me, I mark it as unread. I've tried all the others and they don't stick.
Sure.
So, I think one of those things you just have to learn what sort of person you are. Problem with Spark, if you're an unread person, is they have not thought carefully enough about how messages get marked as read. And so it's too easy to mark a message as read inadvertently when you didn't mean to, and sometimes even when you didn't know you were doing it. So if you click into a mailbox, I haven't used Spark now, and I'll tell you why, in, I don't know, 6-8 months. But so it's possible this has changed. But when I gave up on it, you could click into a mailbox, say, and the first message would get selected, and then you'd click away without even having read it necessarily, and it would get marked as read.
Yeah. That a lot of apps do that because it selects a message for you, and it just says, "Oh, precisely, he's read that." Yeah.
So a while back, Julio Ojeda Zapata, who writes for us on TidBITs, said, "Hey, I want to write a review of this beta app called MimeStream, which is a Gmail-specific client that uses the API, so it gives you a full Mac interface." Instead of the Gmail web interface, which I'd been starting to have some troubles with, to be fair. I was looking away from the Gmail web interface because certain things Google had done were not fitting as well with my working style. And so I say, well, cool, I'll give this MimeStream app a try. And it's a brilliant little app. It's written by a guy who used to be on the Apple Mail team at Apple, and he's really good. And he's really open to discussing stuff. So in fact, MimeStream had the same problem with unread messages. It was better than Spark and other, in some ways with that already, but it still had that one where you click into a mailbox and there's one message that's selected, and then you click out and suddenly that one's been unread. And so I mentioned this to him, and he's like, "Oh, okay, here's why I do this." And he explained, like the Apple theory that something should always be selected, and like in notes and reminders. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair. But in Mail, you've got a message list, and so something is selected in the message list, but that doesn't mean you need to show its contents. Because you could work with multiple messages in the message list too.
Yeah.
And so we had that conversation, and he actually tried a couple of things to make it work the way I want. One of them we both agreed we didn't like. Basically you had to keep clicking on something to get it to mark as read. When you'd already read it, and then he finally hit upon the sweet spot. So yeah, this MimeStream app, still in beta. It's free to try while it's in beta, and for anyone who's using Gmail, only works with Gmail, I recommend it highly. It's a neat little app. It's very quick. It maintains that kind of search focus, although he's working on ways of improving that too. And it's just a joy to use. I really like being able to spin through mail very quickly, and that makes it possible.
Yeah, I looked into this because you told me about this app as we were preparing for today's interview, and I spent some time over the weekend looking at it, and this looks like a really nice app. Now, I'm not a Gmail user, so I haven't gone at it in depth, but a frequent question we get from listeners is, what is a good Gmail app? And most of them are terrible. And my usual advice is just use the web browser. That's what it's made for. But this looks like an app you could really recommend.
Yeah. Before this, I used Mailplane for a long time. And Mailplane basically is a Mac app wrapper for the Gmail interface.
Yeah.
So again, Uncomplex is the company. They do a great job. And it's nice that it pulls it out. I don't like I don't like email in my browser. I don't like Google Docs in my browser normally because I consider them apps. And so I want them separated for switching between things and not getting tabs to be confused. But Mailplane is completely at the mercy of what Gmail does with the rest of the interface. And so there were changes there that were starting to get on my nerves. And so that's well worth trying. And to be fair, when I say that email I consider the most important, that's still true, but it's actually much less true than it used to be. Because all my TidBITs and Take Control stuff back when we were doing Take Control, we've been doing in Slack. And it's just one of those things where it's Slack works well, and I mean, there's other variants on the concept of channels of instant messaging, but for a small, fairly fast-moving group, I find that Slack is a better approach than little mailing lists, which we had in email before Slack. So we switched intentionally, and I like that as a quicker way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean that's how Relay runs internally, and it's nice. It's almost like my inbox has become conversation outside of the company, and Slack is conversation inside the company.
Yes, that is exactly the same thing. I mean, the only internal, quote unquote, internal conversations I have is, let's say we get, email from a PR person who, is interested in talking to us about an article, and I need to forward that to another one of my editors. That's the extent of it. Everything else happens in Slack because it's just faster. It's as simple as that. And these are not. And yes, we use the free version, and we don't care about losing access to our history and stuff like that, because this is like chatter. It's important business chatter, but it's just chatter. It's like, okay, you can take that article live now. Great, doing that. Here's the link.
A month later, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Totally don't care. So yeah, so that's true. We've also started using Trello. We have kind of an on again, off again relationship with Trello. So it's the on again is for TidBITs articles, and basically we made a mistake at some point and slightly stepped on one of our authors had asked to be able to write an article, and we ended up accidentally giving that to a different person, and it was just a minor communication failure, but we felt badly about it. And so Josh Centers, who is our managing editor, is like, I'm spinning up Trello again. And so he kind of cleaned up the board, and, and now we have you can pitch here, and we move it into working, and then we move it into editing, and then we say it's done and stuff like that. And it just helps us keep a little bit more track of what's going on. So we used to use Trello heavily in the Take Control days for process lists. We love Trello for that. But once we sold Take Control, then Joe Kissel came up with his own systems.
I like Trello as well. I recently wrote about building a Kanban board in a graphics app, and a lot of people wrote in about how they do it in Trello. And it feels to me like it's just such the natural choice, because it does two things. It's number one, it's very easy to start. So you can use it at a basic level with really no research. But if you want to go deeper, they have added some really deep features to Trello over the last few years where you can really, do a lot with it as a collaboration tool.
That's true. And I will say, though, that like just recently, I don't know if you guys have been seeing this, there's some transition to workspaces that's happening, and we totally don't understand it.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a mess.
I literally do not know what they're talking about, but it's going to happen on June 3rd, apparently. And it feels as though they've added so many deep features in some cases that it gets getting in the way of just that true, wonderful cards on lists on boards metaphor that they came up with however many years ago, because we were very early adopters of Trello. And so it's gone through first of all, it was just it's free and easy to use, and then it became more of a we're actually going to charge for it, and now it's owned by Atlassian, and it's all fine, but it does feel as though it's a little bit harder to get started with than it used to be.
Well, hopefully they don't lose that simplicity, because I think that's what brings a lot of people in.
Yeah, I agree. And, and all of this, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, again, this Trello system, when we have a card that's tracking an article over different parts of the process, some of the stuff that's just nice about it is, for instance, that card has a link to the article in Google Docs, which is where we do all our writing. And so, it's not a problem generally for us, but every now and then, someone will forget to create an article in the right folder, but it'll still have the right permissions. So and then we won't be able to find it again. Right. Well, where did it go? Oh, they didn't put it in the right folder. But, so this is a way that, having the article link moving along with the card like that makes it easier to find occasionally in Google Docs. But, and actually just to continue on with the stuff we rely on, man, Google Docs is it these days. Everything we write is in Google Docs. And it simply comes down to collaboration is king.
Yeah. I mean, because you guys have, over the years, been advocates for a lot of different word processing systems.
Yep.
I've always kept up with what you've used because I always felt like, you were at the sharp end of the stick on a lot of that stuff.
Yep, and the fact is, and for instance, like in the take control time, we actually switched major word processors 3 times. So first we used Word because it's Word and it had all the features we needed, and except for one, which was we needed to be able to build PDFs with links. And only in the very early days of Take Control, only Word for Windows could do that. And so we actually had a step where we moved the file to Windows. I forget, it must have been an emulation, and exported the PDF, and then did everything back on the Mac again. So that was the Word era. Then we moved to Pages when Pages got the ability to export those PDFs, and then at some point, Nicest Writer Pro came out, and we love Nicest Writer. I've been using Nicest Writer like since the 90s.
Yeah.
And having those macros and the incredible grep-based searching, Nicest Writer is just the cat's pajamas when it comes to powerful, customizable word processors that, you can bend to your will. And so that was what, we used up till the end. But the problem for TidBITs is we need to be faster. So with Nicest Writer, which is a great word processor, we use Dropbox to provide the collaboration. And I don't know if you guys have done this kind of thing, but when you get into a Dropbox scenario with a document-based app, you really have to version the app. Because if anything goes wrong, then you're like pouring through Dropbox versions trying to figure out the right one. It's just easier to have a system. And we did this because we'd have like 3 people, author, editor, and Tanya, maybe me. So 3 or 4 people who'd be looking at a file. And so we'd always have an out folder. And what you would do is you'd move the folder into the out folder and you'd rename it with your initials and a version number. And then when you checked it back in, you would leave you'd leave a copy in there. We had an old folder, and so that we'd have this just like selection of version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you could always see who'd done what in each version. And when you're working with a 150-page word processing document that's 100 megabytes because it's got big images in it, corruption happens sometimes. So. Yeah. You really need to do that. And it's just too slow to do the kind of renaming and moving all the time. And Google Docs just does it all. You get a lot of color sometimes, but that's about the extent of the problem with collaboration in Google Docs.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute, because Google Docs is excellent in the sense that you can have 3 people in a document at the same time typing, and it's not going to trip on itself.
Yeah.
But, and that's where people stop. Like, well, that's why it's good at collaboration. But I would argue that, there's more to collaboration than just contemporaneous writing. And how do you manage that? Like, how do you, when you open a Google Doc, how do you know whether Adam's been writing on it, Josh has been writing on it, or Tanya's been writing on it?
Well, and I think one of the mistakes people make is they think this like simultaneous writing is collaboration. That almost never happens. Like it just doesn't. And it's actually most of us who in the TidBITs world don't like it. So like if you're working in a document and someone else comes in, usually you back off. And part of it is like, let's say Julio has written an article and I'm editing it and Josh comes in. He shouldn't do anything because I don't necessarily work entirely linearly. So, I'll start editing at the top and I'll work my way down. But as I get further down, I may go, oh, I see why this is here now. So now I'm going to go back up to the top and fix that stuff at the top that I changed or needs to be fixed because I understand what's going on in the full document now. So having 2 people in a document at once can just be confusing because just because you've done something doesn't mean you're even going to commit to it. Like I might go and revert my change because now I understand why those words were there at the top. And so usually we're not like formal about it or anything, but I think we've just sort of all come to the idea of like, oh yeah, someone else is in the document. I'll back away for a while. So here's the thing. So let's say Julio submits an article. I will take an edit pass on that article, and all the edits I make as sort of quote unquote primary editor, Julio has to approve, and he has to approve or reject them. Like he doesn't get to ignore them. He can reject them if he doesn't agree with them, although at that point, what usually we say is approve it and then change it again and explain why you've done it. Yeah. Because I made the change for a reason. If Josh comes in and as another editor, same thing. Julio is the guy who gets to approve or reject Josh's changes. But after the first writing, everyone works in suggesting mode, including Julio. So when Julio comes through and approves and rejects my changes, if he makes additional changes, which he's going to likely, because like he'll see one of my changes like, oh, I see what he's trying to do, but I'm going to rewrite it in my voice. He's in suggesting, and I as primary editor get to approve his changes. And so it's very important to set those roles of author and primary editor, and to have the rules of who approves whose changes, and the fact that they must do so. You don't get to just leave them. So the document is always, it gets more colorful and then less colorful, more colorful and less colorful. And we will often take 2 or 3 passes on a long article. So it'll go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that happens often in Slack or in Trello, depending on sort of the immediacy of it. The person who we do the most of that with is Glenn Fleischman, because Glenn is incapable of not writing new stuff on every pass he takes. So he'll just think of a better way to say something and everything. So each time we trade the thing back and forth, there's fewer and fewer changes, but it will often go like 4 or 5 passes, because he'll like, oh, I got a great new way of explaining this, this complicated stuff. Like, oh, that's great, but now I had to make 2 edits in that new stuff. So wait,
Glenn has more to say? That is so off brand for him.
Glenn. Yeah. So I've known Glenn for a very, very long time at this point. So we work pretty well together, because we've written so much. We've written entire books together. But yes.
Now, do you write that in, I guess I would call it rich text format? I mean, you're embedding links and images and things and text formatting right in the Google Doc.
We do. So, 2017, 18? Can't remember which year it was. I think it was 17. We did a major back-end switch for TidBITs. So before then, for the previous, 10, 12 years, we had been using something we called the TidBITs publishing system, which Glenn had actually written in Perl. So it was a homegrown publishing system that did exactly what we wanted. It was brilliant. It was fast. It worked really well. However, it was really brittle. Sure. In other words, it did exactly what we wanted and nothing more. And if anything changed, stuff broke.
when there's only one user for a product, you find all the bugs.
Yes. And the problem was that we had it for so long, and it worked, frankly, so well for so long, Glenn actually forgot how to fix stuff. Like, I mean, he would look at the code once every 2 years. Yeah. And because it worked. Suddenly something broke it. And he'd have to try to figure out. So we're like, okay, we really need to redo the TidBITs infrastructure. We moved to, again, heavily bespoke, system, but it's based on WordPress now. And so in the TidBITs publishing system, the input format was Markdown. And so that was when we used BBEdit, and we actually used Subversion for version control and collaboration with BBEdit, and pasted Markdown into the TPS. With the new system, when we knew what we were doing along the whole way, and switched to Google Docs, we said, you're right, we can do complete rich text. So we're doing it's rich text, but it's semantic rich text. So H1s, H2s, a little bit of bold and italic is about all the non-semantic formatting that we do, and images go into the Google Docs so that we see them in context. because that is the one thing we cannot move over cleanly with like a copy and paste into WordPress. You can't copy and paste images out of Google Docs and get them into WordPress. So we have to upload those separately, which is the main automation thing that we are unhappy about. But we copy and paste the text from Google Docs into WordPress. And then you'll also like this. We click the little text button in WordPress to see the code, and then press a keyboard Maestro macro that sends the text over to BBEdit to be cleaned. because I mean, I don't know, Google Docs always puts like span line, text line weight, this, font size 400%, it's just ugly HTML. And it's really simple to clean it up in BBEdit because it's all in spans. And so we send it to BBEdit, a text factory cleans it up and pastes it right back into WordPress, and then it's gorgeous. So that's it's a nice system. I'm still frustrated by the fact that I can't just push a button in Google Docs and have the text and graphics show up in WordPress in a useful way. There's a WordPress plugin actually from Automatic, the WordPress people, that does it, but it doesn't really quite work properly. And then there's a service that will do it, but it's expensive. It's like, I don't know, I want to say like $59 a month or something like that, or $99 a month. It was one of those things where like at $20 a month I would have considered it, but $100 a month I was not going to consider it. We can copy and paste for $100 a month.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
Yeah, right. Precisely. So it's been a fascinating approach, and the developer we have working on the WordPress side is brilliant. So we have lots of neat little shortcuts. So if you read TidBITs, you're familiar with this. We give article references to old articles all the time. And we have a very specific format for doing that. And for those of us who are logged into our WordPress site, viewing the main TidBITs, the front end of it, but we're logged in, a black bar appears at the top, and then there's various links in that so we can edit the post or whatnot. But one of them actually just, when you click it, it gives you a perfectly formatted reference that you can paste into your article. So, because that's like things like, generating a reference in the proper format with the date of the article, it is annoying as all get out. It's just make work. So that's the sort of thing we had our developer just give us a one-click solution to copying and pasting that.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Text Expander from Smile. Go to textexpander.com/podcast to get 20% off and type more with less effort. Text Expander removes the repetition out of work so you can focus on what matters most. With Text Expander, you can say goodbye to repetitive text entry, spelling and message errors, and trying to remember the right thing to say. When you use Text Expander, you can say the right thing in just a few keystrokes. It's better than copy and paste or scripts and templates. Text Expander snippets allow you to maximize your time by getting rid of the repetitive things you type while still customizing and personalizing your messages. Text Expander can be used on any platform, in any app, anywhere you type. So take your time back and increase your productivity with Text Expander. I just sent out my invoices for my law practice last night, and I use a really cool Text Expander snippet for that. I enter the month automatically in the subject line with a snippet because Text Expander can use the current month. And it was the May invoice, so it says Sparks Law May invoice. It types that in automatically. Text Expander also lets you hard code the tab key into an expansion snippet, which is something you can't do with most other text expansion tools. So not only does it fill out the subject line, then it jumps to the body of the line and it fills in the text I want for the invoice language and the message I send to the client. It even lets me type in their name and gives me a little section where I can type a particular note for the invoice. All of that is done with a single Text Expander snippet, and I use it so many times every month, it just really makes my life easier. That's just one of the many things you can do with Text Expander. So get 20% off your first year. Just go to textexpander.com/podcast right now to learn more and let them know you heard about it at the Mac Power Users.
I know a big part of the TidBITs reading experience is screenshots, images of applications or parts of macOS itself. You touched on a little bit that you use Google Docs to do that, and then you've got to get them out. But what does the workflow around screenshots look like more generally?
Oh, yeah. There's another topic which I'm, I feel like I'm always striving and never quite reaching. Well, keep in mind, TIB has been going so long, we predate graphics on the internet.
Right.
At all. and then we had like, we predated the web, and then we predated, then we had when we had a website, but you really weren't going to put graphics in because that was hard. It's just you couldn't do it, and so etc. So we've been sort of working our way up to this for years and years and years.
Yeah, imagine in 1992, we don't need those talkies. We're good.
Yes, and for a while we did have graphics, but they would be just a link, right? You'd have to click the link to go to our FTP site to load the graphic. So now we have like full graphics, and because it's WordPress, we can do left and right alignments. We can even do inline graphics, so we don't do too much of that because they're a royal pain in the butt. We did those for Take Control pretty heavily, and it's a nice thing to do, but it's a lot of work. So there's two parts of what we have trouble with graphics. One of them was actually solved just by moving to WordPress, which is that when you do graphics in a Markdown-based scenario, you don't get any control over how big the graphic is. And if you take, say, a screenshot on a Retina screen of a relatively small window or palette or something, it gets freaking huge, and in Markdown. And so you have this massive image in your article of a relatively small thing on the screen. And so we were never happy about that. And so WordPress just allowed us to resize images. So that was nice. And so now our rule, and I've never seen anyone talk about this, but I believe that the text in a screenshot should never be larger than the body text of the article around it.
Yeah, that's a good
right?
That's a good rule.
Right?
Yeah,
just as a simple way of thinking about it, and that way, because and if possible, it should look basically the size it was on screen when you took the screenshot, which is hard to do if you think about it. Like, there's no way to say size this to its original size, because there's, you get into DPIs and different screen sizes and blah, blah, blah. It's just really tricky. So basically we just do it by hand. You just resize and you're like, yeah, that looks about right. So that was sort of thing number one that really changed and helped us. Thing number two is that screenshots, a lot of screenshots on both the Mac and iOS these days have a lot of white in them. And our page background is white. And so if you have white on white, it's called a bleed, and it looks terrible because you can't tell where the screenshot ends and the page background starts. So we wanted to border them. Okay, that shouldn't be that hard. And in fact, Joe Kissel created us a QuickTime effect that we used in a macro years and years and years ago for Take Control to do this. And so I've been, keyboard maestro, Control Option B borders an image on my system, and that worked pretty well. Until we hit Big Sur on the Mac, and it never worked all that well on the iPhone because you just got these rectangular iPhone screenshots, which, they showed you the content, but they didn't say iPhone. Like, you had to actually parse it as an iPhone screenshot. And so we started looking for sort of new ways to border stuff. For the iPhone, Federico Vitici, the Mac Stories guy, has come up with an absolutely brilliant shortcut called Apple Frames. And you can take screenshots, you can take 2 or 3 of them, you select them, you run this shortcut, it borders them with an iPhone, like all the Chrome makes it look like it's in an iPhone physically, and then it combines them into a horizontal layout. Absolutely brilliant. It's great. So we use that. There's also a nice little app called Picsew, Picsew, on the iPhone that gives you a little bit more flexibility. Apple Frames sometimes fails if you don't have the right size screenshots or, various things along those lines. So those have given us a way of making iPhone screenshots fit in well. On the Mac side, Big Sur really screwed things up because all these windows are now rounded rects, and our bordering system was just doing. I mean, when you take a screenshot, you don't get a rounded rect. Well, I shouldn't say that. You get a rounded rect if you're willing to put up with Apple's massive shadows. But the massive shadows make it look really funny because then you get, a ton of essentially dead space in your article.
Yeah.
So we try to take the shadows out. And if you take the shadows out, then you lose borders entirely. And so now that the borders are these rounded rects, and our Border Me QuickTime thing gave us hard rectangles. So we actually just very recently switched to retro batch from Flying Meat, Gus Mueller and the Acorn guy. And again, Joe Kissel had done the same thing for Take Control, so we piggybacked on what he had done, and he came up with a really neat way of kind of like actually using borders and shadows to do the rounded rect bordering in a very nice way. So that's been working. What I'm not happy about with this, and Stephen, maybe you actually can check this for me more easily. It feels to me like in Big Sur, when you do a screenshot and you want to grab like a dialogue or a window, it's much less likely that it will do it, that you'll get some, like if you are in system preferences and you click something that brings up a sheet, you cannot get just that sheet.
It's modal. Yeah.
It's modal, but I think it's gotten worse in Big Sur.
Yeah, I think it has. And I think in Catalyst apps, like if they have any sort of separate window segment, it's not grabbable.
Right.
But even in like traditional AppKit apps, it's been hit or miss. Yeah. Even in Apple's own applications, like Calendar would work one way and Reminders would work another way. So yeah, that's always been frustrating.
So this is my challenge, like in the last, well, it's been getting worse and worse, but it hits me only occasionally. So for instance, software update, system preferences software update pane. If you want to take a screenshot of what the release notes of the next Mac OS one are, you've got this sheet and you can't extract it programmatically from the system preferences window. And it's rounded rects. So if you take if you just take you take a rectangular screenshot and cut it out, you get these weird little blobs of color in the corners from the rounded rect. And so I've just stumbled on an approach in Affinity Designer, I think, which lets me draw a rounded rect and sort of like use that as a mask. I'm not a graphics guy, so this is definitely like the edge of what I know how to do. But I think that may be my new technique for getting better rounded rect screenshots out of Big Sur. I was just doing an article where I was like, in preview when you make a signature, you get that weird little popover.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that weird little popover isn't an object that you can grab, so you have to grab the whole window or the whole screen and then cut it out. Yeah. And then edit it. So that's the kind of thing that I'm fighting with.
Yeah, something that drives me nuts is the rounded rec that we've got now. And for listeners who haven't noticed this, I'm sorry I'm about to make things harder for you. But starting with Big Sur, they made the windows are no longer squares on the Mac. They have a little radius on every corner. But then when you get on a laptop, the corners are still sharp. And so you have something in a corner and you've got like a little bit of like daylight on the edge of the window that is completely unusable pixels. And every time I look at that, it just drives me nuts. I feel like the laptops now should actually have the rounded rectangles on the screens, but I don't know. Maybe tomorrow. Who knows?
And you're looking at things at full screen on a laptop all the time. I don't do that on the big monitors, obviously, but right on a laptop, you're going to see through that essentially. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just ruined it for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Everyone's mad now.
It's one of those things where, you figure all this stuff out, and it's possible, like, I'll have to talk to Gus Mueller. It's possible that RetroBatch can actually do this kind of stuff too. That app is so powerful, and I so totally don't understand much of what it can do, but I'm gonna look into it, because it's just frustrating when you want to produce something that looks totally professional, and Apple's making it hard. I mean, and it's been getting harder and harder like for the last 20 years. I mean, you used to be able to grab like any object because the Mac OS used to be much more like object oriented in terms of menus and buttons and things like that. And screenshot apps could actually touch all those and see them independently, and not nearly as much so anymore.
Well, earlier, I want to talk about automation for a second, because you invoked the word keyboard maestro. And
repeatedly.
And I feel like someone like Adam Engst has probably got some really cool ideas about how to use keyboard maestro. Can you share some of your favorite scripts with us?
Oh, boy, I'm sitting there looking at my keyboard maestro screen. I have it scrolls at least three screens full to go all the way up and down. So there's a ton of stuff. And actually, so remember I talked about using Apple Frames to combine and frame iPhone screenshots? Well, before we had that, we actually had a keyboard maestro approach that did it. And it was the same sort of thing. You'd select a couple of screenshots and then hit a key, and it would, in this case, it would only border them, and we didn't have the fanciness of the iPhone frame, and then combine them, 32 pixels apart or something like that. And I never went and did the Uber version that would figure out from the size of the screenshot what to do.
Which frame?
Because it's like the iPhone 6 and 6S and 7 are different from the iPhone 10, and so I end up having 8 screenshot or 8 macros for the different ones. The same thing with all the different Apple Watch sizes and stuff like that. So, but in terms of what I do, I'm obviously bordering those graphics. Here's another interesting screenshot one. Let's say I cut an iPhone screenshot because only the top third of it is useful.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got white at the bottom, like I've actually just literally cropped up, so I'm only showing the top third, the bottom is white and it's going to bleed badly. So I have a Keyboard Maestro macro that allows me to paste. It actually pops up a palette. It's my only palette one. I can choose a thin black line, a fuzzy line, or a fuzzy box. And the thin black line will let me kind of close the bottom of that third of the screenshot, so I get black at the bottom rather than white. And then the fuzzy line and the fuzzy box are for redacting information in screenshots. Sure. I need to block out a telephone number or something. So that's and I figured out like how to put those graphics into a macro so it gives them to me. But probably the thing that I rely on on Keyboard Maestro for more than absolutely anything else is, and this is why I will never have a laptop with a track. I'm blanking on the name. The bar at the top, the
touch bar.
Yeah,
it's like
that's okay. I don't think they're going to make them anymore pretty soon.
Well, that's just it. So I have F1 through F13 on my big black DOS keyboard here, and every other keyboard I've ever used. Each of those function keys is mapped to an app. And so, if I want to switch to my word processor, it's F1. If I want to switch to my web browser, it's F2. If I want to switch to email, it's F3. If I want to switch to my file transfer app, it's F4. And you notice I'm not giving names because, in fact, those change over time. Yeah. And, so, F3 used to be Eudora back in the 90s, and it has literally been F3 since the 90s.
Yeah.
So that's why, and I mean, actually, this predates Keyboard Maestro, but I have always used, Quick Keys was one of the first 2 apps I ever bought for the Mac in 1990. No, not 1990, 1988. Sorry. Quick Keys and Suitcase. So, I have been using macro apps forever. And so having Keyboard Maestro just giving me one button access to the apps that I use the most is absolutely necessary at all times.
Have you played with because like this, I call it setups, like doing setups with Keyboard Maestro, because you can have it not only activate the app, you can also say, put it in this position on the screen and open this document or open these tabs. Have you gone like further down that rabbit hole?
A little bit. I actually am of the firm belief that all apps should stay on the screen where I put them. Yeah. And for the most part, that's true. So I don't have to move. I don't have to have Keyboard Maestro move them.
I find that something that's harder these days than it used to be. There's a lot of apps that
The worst offender, messages. Cannot remember its window location.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe it's different for you guys, but like I have messages in the far left of my second monitor or my left-hand monitor, and it never opens there. But keep in mind, I reboot my machine, once every 2 to 4 weeks, something like that. It's probably when a security update or something comes out, so it doesn't come up very often. I do have a couple of macros that will like launch a certain app at a certain time with a certain document. So yeah, there's a few of those. I have a macro that converts the selected ping to JPEG, and that uses an Automator workflow. So there's a certain number of things I'll do in Automator just because it's sort of easier for me, and then I'll have Keyboard Maestro create that. When I look through my list here, one of the things I'm interested in is I have a lot of macros that I don't use anymore. That they were important for a while, or maybe they were important even for only one project, and I just never deleted them. But they're still there, and I'm actually not unhappy that they're still there because I'll sometimes go back to them and like look at the technique I used.
Yeah, use it as a starting point for a new one.
Precisely. Yeah. I have a number of timed macros as well that set my system up to be backed up properly. So, it wakes it up at a certain time and makes sure the right drive is mounted and all that kind of stuff. I have a macro at login every day that unmounts the bootable duplicate, because that will sometimes cause confusions if you have your bootable duplicate online at the same time as your main drive. One password gets confused about updates, for instance.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many different ways to use Keyboard Maestro to make it your Mac.
It is an astonishing app, and Peter Lewis, and I've known Peter, since the early 90s. He's done such a wonderful job of making it deeper and deeper and deeper, and it really. One of the things I like about Keyboard Maestro the most, I don't use it as much as I probably should. Peter has a great forum. And the people on his forum solve problems for each other. So, it's like if you're ever stuck with Keyboard Maestro, you just ask on this forum and someone will like probably just write it for you. They will really help. Because that's my problem is like I'm really good at kind of low level automation, and I'm just not a programmer. AppleScript has never been a thing for me. Ever since HyperCard went away, I've been pining for the fjords ever since.
Well, I feel like tomorrow there's a good chance we'll get shortcuts for Mac. Shortcuts for Mac, which really? I guess.
Yeah.
I feel like we may get shortcuts for Mac, and that kind of is a HyperCard successor. But I don't see Keyboard Maestro leaving anytime soon, because there's no way they're going to give us the access through shortcuts that we get through Keyboard Maestro.
No, and I mean the fact that Keyboard Maestro can't be in the Mac App Store because it touches so much of the system at such a low level. No, it's not, and and
that's
honestly,
a feature, not a bug.
Precisely, it's a feature, not a bug. Yeah. And if Apple ever takes that away, that becomes a major problem for me. Yeah, like that's part of the reason why I can't use the iPad, right? So, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by The Intrazone. If you're looking for a new show to listen to, The Intrazone is a bi-weekly podcast with conversations and interviews on how Microsoft SharePoint, OneDrive, and related tech can work for you. You'll hear from guest experts behind the scenes and out in the field, so you can see how SharePoint fits into your everyday work life to easily share and manage content, knowledge, and applications. Each show covers a bunch of segments like news and announcements, focus topics, guest perspectives, FAQs, upcoming events, and much more. And the topics for each show are really interesting. Things like migrating to the cloud from your old legacy systems. I think it's my favorite topic they cover, actually. But also crisis management, working remotely, and dealing with cloud admin issues. All really interesting stuff if you use these tools, and you probably do. So go and listen to it now. Just search for The Intrazone wherever you get your podcast. That's INTRAZONE, or click the link in the show notes to check it out. Our thanks to The Intrazone by Microsoft SharePoint for the support of the show, and Relay FM. So WWDC starts tomorrow. It feels like we just had the last one. I'm not sure what happened there. But, Adam, it's fun to talk to you about this because you have followed Apple for a really long time and you've seen the changes in the company, and WWDC is when they get on stage and talk to developers. And I'm sure in the first several years of TidBITs, a lot of that stuff didn't come to pass. But
Rhapsody.
Just a road of pain through the 90s. But I'm curious what before we get to specific stuff about this year, like, do you have any reflections on where WWDC is today compared to where it used to be?
It's so completely different. I have never been to WWDC, just to get that out of there. I'm not a developer, and for the longest time, the WWDC keynote was really for developers. And this is, well before it was live streamed for, and they made it, all fancies for everyone. And so when Tanya and I used to live in Seattle, we lived in Seattle from 91 to 2001. And what we would do and we did this for, 4 or 5 years, I think, is we would actually fly down to the Bay Area and stay with my sister who lived there and go to a party at the house of a guy named Rick Holtzgraf, who wrote Solitaire Till Dawn. And he knew a lot of programmers, including a lot of the folks from Australia, like Peter Lewis. And basically, we'd go on basically the weekend after WWDC ended. And so everyone would be completely exhausted and tired. They'd been like living this for a week. And we'd go to this party, and everyone would be talking nonstop about what had just happened. And this was a lot of the back then, Apple didn't really get to say, this is what's going to go on. Developers could actually more or less disagree and stuff. And there were, entire technologies that died on the vine because, developers like, yeah, that's stupid. So it was the best way to do WWDC because we got, the unvarnished developer opinion about everything Apple had just said. Sadly, we moved, the party stopped happening, WWDC changed, and Apple obviously controls both the horizontal and the vertical now. So I do feel like it's much more of, here's your marching orders for the next year. Sometimes those are, more or less gently conveyed. I think that people didn't really pick up on the 32-bit apps are going away as quickly as they might have. Apple was clear about it, but, man, it wasn't like we didn't have years and for these developers to figure this out. And some of them just never really did. And ended up being kind of surprised when, hey, Catalina's here and your app doesn't launch anymore. So, so that's that. I will say, sort of from the journalist perspective, WWDC is like taking a 2x4 to the brain. Apple announces so much stuff, and you can't even begin to unpack it in the amount of time you've got to before you have to get an article out or 4 articles out, because it is just nonstop cool stuff announcements. And as you alluded to earlier, David, it feels like Christmas in part because I think WWDC has some of the smaller things. Like they'll just like a feature will have improved, and I feel those are sometimes more important announcements than, we have this major new technology, blah, blah, blah. Because the major new technology you may never use, whereas the feature getting a slight tweak may make your life better instantly when you get it and from then on.
Yeah, some of my favorite slides in the keynote are always those word salad slides.
Yes. Yeah, you're like,
where
yes,
they'll put up
look at that
a
one.
million things, and like one of them will be some little bug that has been driving you nuts forever that is now solved, or just some little additional feature just to get a little of the friction out of your daily grind. And those are amazing. Although, thinking back, did we get that slide in 2020? I'm not sure we did with the new format.
Yeah, they've started doing these kind of tile slides, I call them, where it's like 15 or 20 tiles with different features on them, and those are great for the hardware because it's like this quick overview of what's in on a new Mac or something. But I'm not sure if that they're doing that for the software as much. I think that's really where I find this stuff to be interesting. And I have to say, I also don't really buy into, people who are like, you'll pry snow leopard out of my hands with my cold dead hands kind of thing. I personally do not find that the operating systems make that much of a difference in my life.
Yeah.
My life revolves around apps. It's Google Docs and it's Keyboard Maestro and it's, I'm using Brave for the browser now and stuff like that. And, so yeah, whatever, Big Sur didn't really change that much for me. I mean, it looks a little different, but it did not change the way I interact with my Mac in any significant way. And a little bit less true on the iOS side, where sometimes those changes are bigger, or harder to separate anyway. But so I'm almost always happy to see new stuff. I'll choose whether I use it or not. That's my choice. But at least I get a choice when Apple announces it.
I mean, they continue to iterate this stuff, and I mean the Mac operating system. I mean, well, let's say with Mac OS 10. Let's forget about legacy Mac. Yeah. How long has Mac OS 10 been around? So was it now over 20 years? We just did a show on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, it's not going to have the groundbreaking changes that the mobile platforms get every year because it's older and it's already had those. But I'm with you. I do think that, moving forward usually is a good idea. Sometimes there are mistakes made. Sometimes they try to get too clever about something that makes life harder for everyone. But overall, I like to see them evolving and growing this stuff. And I attend WWDC when I can. And just like you, I'm sorry, I should restate that. I go to the city where WWDC is held.
See, there you go.
Right. Yep.
So you're going for the parties, basically.
Well, I mean, I'm a lawyer and I represent a lot of developers, so it's like the one time a year I get to have tea with them. And then the other thing is just talking to developers, especially a day or two after the announcements, after they have time for things to sink in. You just get so much feedback about what features are making people excited. And I would argue that the developers still have a say. I mean, Steve and I have talked to developers at WWDC that are just not at all interested in some big new feature Apple's trying to sell. And quite often that feature doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. Actually, I mean, I think I overstated that, and part of the reason why is that back in the time frame where I was talking about stuff, it felt like that was in the era when there were evangelists. And and Apple talked to developers sort of more throughout, so it felt like there was more of a feedback loop. Whereas now, I would suggest that developers will simply no, we're not going to adopt that.
Yeah, I know. Back in the day, Steve Jobs did questions and answers on the floor during the keynote. I mean, that was not happening towards the end of his life.
Yeah, and you don't see that kind of stuff. I mean, WWDC, I mean, they did a great job with it being virtual last year, but it does, you do lose a little bit of that interaction. And I know, I'm friends with Jim Ray, who's the guy behind Panorama database, and he was telling me this great story of he had this bug. It was a Mac bug, but it was taking him incredible amount of time to figure it out, and he ended up like pinning down the guy at Apple at WWDC, in this kind of convoluted story to be able, and and ended up working with him for like an hour and a half, and the guy's like, I got it now, I see the bug. And was able to go back and fix Mac OS so Panorama could work properly. So, but that's the kind of thing. That's where you need that kind of in-person feel. And, probably next year we'll get back to some of that. But I have to say, also, it was always sad when lots of people couldn't go. So if Apple can make it more open to people by making it virtual as well, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I do think that is a real consideration because not only was it difficult to get a ticket, it's really expensive, to fly there. And San Jose had figured out what was going on. So the room rates had like tripled over the couple of years they were there. And that there's like an entitlement there that not everybody has. And, Apple putting a bunch of money into making it available to everyone, no matter where you are in the world. I mean, there is a real case to be made. That's a better way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see. I mean, I think it's a safe bet to say we're going to see iOS 15 and iPadOS 15 and watchOS 8 and tvOS 15, which will have new screensavers probably. So, let's hope there's new screensavers, because that's about all we ever get from tvOS, it seems. Not that I'm bitter and twisted, mind you, but
yeah, you got the new remote. What more do you want?
Yeah, it's got a mute button. I'm happy.
They'll make a new one that has a tracker built in.
Yeah, right. I'm not the sort of person who loses stuff. So I have an AirTag that I played with a bit, but I'm not too invested in that, and I don't ever lose my remote, so I'm not, again, that concerned. But just like, seriously, you didn't get the irony of announcing this in the same day as AirTag?
I was thinking about that. They made a really funny video where the guy like dives into his couch.
Yes.
Weren't there remotes inside the couch when he was down there?
I said, you just wanted to know, like, did no one realize this is kind of looks bad? I don't know.
I do think that Apple's a very isolated company in a lot of ways, and you do have to wonder. I mean, how much did the new remote guys know about the tracking stuff?
Almost, I would say none, and because Apple silos everything in a huge way. And so, yeah, I'm almost certain that they would have had no knowledge of it. And so at that point, what you run into is you have to work your way up the org chart high enough to someone who knows that both are doing it. And there's few enough of those people that, it could have just been an oversight. I mean, literally, where, oh, right, crud, we didn't think about that in time, and therefore we can't put that technology into the Siri remote.
I would be shocked if they don't have a version in years future that has it built in.
It would, if AirTag is a success, yes. I mean, and we'll see. I mean, obviously there's sort of no way of knowing, until they say something about it. But if they say, yes, we've sold 500 million AirTags in the last year, then I think we can bet that it's going to be spreading much more widely.
All right, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to use my superpowers to, number one, put you in Tim Cook's seat. And then I'm going to also give you a time machine so you can go back to last year and say, all right, Adam, you love the Mac. You're all in with the Mac. What are the things you want the team working on so when we get to WWDC 2021, we can share it with the world? What would you like to change about the Mac OS?
Wow. That's a great question.
Well, it requires a chair and a time machine, so it should be a good question.
It does. And I assume the chair is in the time machine, and it's one of those, fancy ones.
But no seatbelt, because, they don't have seatbelt laws in time machines yet.
It's only temporal whiplash. I hate to say it, but I go back a little bit to what I said before of the operating system doesn't make that much difference to me. And I think that what I would do is continue to polish and refine and clean up. And I'm going to say this, the word is going to be taken incorrectly, but objectify. So how we were talking about like the screen capture apps not being able to get to stuff?
Sure.
It feels like Apple's not following the mindset that they used to in terms of like apps being broken into these parts that were understandable and accessible. So, back to like the resources, you used to have the resource fork and you could go in and edit resources. And I'm not saying we should be able to do that. It's more that the way Catalyst apps, like they're not quite real Mac apps, and the screenshots have gotten harder because they're like not able to get at the objects. It feels like there's this kind of film that's being put over the whole operating system that makes it harder to touch these objects, these parts of the operating system that they must still be there, but we're not able to do it as much. And maybe that's a little bit of what like shortcuts on the Mac will re-enable. Because shortcuts to be able to do stuff will have to get to that.
So you're looking for polish more than features, really?
Yeah.
I think that's a legitimate request. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with you.
Big Sur, the look of Big Sur doesn't really float my boat. Doesn't bother me either. It's sort of whatever, right? And so when Apple says, "Look how much effort we've put into making Big Sur look this way, I'm like, yeah, that's not helping me. It doesn't make any difference to me. You're not making it better, you're just making it different.
Yeah.
Whereas polish and refinement and let me give a slight additional way of thinking about that. One of my favorite apps in macOS is Preview. I love Preview because it's a surprisingly deep app. You can just you open a PDF and look at it in Preview, but what people don't realize is, like you can open a graphic and then you can actually edit the graphic in fairly significant ways that are really quite unrealized. It can do slideshows. You can open multiple. It's just a deep little app, and Apple has lost that sense of adding depth to their apps. Catalyst apps are the most shallow apps around.
Yeah,
and that's what I would like to see.
Kind of by design. Yeah,
kind of by design. But they don't have to be. And that's what bothers me a little bit is I like depth in apps because it feels to me that if you have depth, your surface can still be friendly and attractive and easy to use. But as you go further in, you find the features that give you something more, that delight you in a way that you're not going to be delighted by the face.
Stephen, how do you answer that question? What if we put you in the time machine? What are you going to do?
Man, I really don't disagree with anything that Adam said. I think the thing that I would maybe add to that is you've got to really tell a clearer story about the future of Mac apps, because right now we have AppKit and we have Catalyst, and if you have an Apple Silicon Mac, you have just iPhone apps running around, and you have
Swift UI,
and you have Swift and Swift UI, and if you're a new developer to the Mac, like, I don't know that it's super clear where you should start. And I think that Apple's definitely on a journey with that stuff, but I think it could be a lot more clear where we are now.
See, I actually have just solved all of these problems. We just need HyperCard back.
There we go.
HyperCard, HyperCard is where it's all at for the Mac, for the iPhone, for the iPad. You just everything's HyperCard. It's where you start. It's where you end. We're good. Let's move on.
HyperCard all the way down. I feel like you guys squandered the time machine because the obvious answer is you say, however many people are working on Apple Mail, we're going to triple that number and we're going to pull it out of 1980. So that's what we're going to do.
So 3 people.
Yeah, exactly.
And see, I don't know. I might be one of those people. I was like, let's go back and send that person over to reminders. Or it's funny. There are certain apps where there is a developer mindset, and not every app should be for everyone. I mean, I think this is something that Apple in some ways does wrong, or Apple has to do wrong, because they do believe they have to make stuff for everyone. But I actually think that we need choice, and you should be able to say, this app thinks like me, and that's the one I want to use. And so that's kind of my irritation with Apple Mail, is that it doesn't think like me, but it does have that kind of personality. And so, it's not like an app that everyone can use, where, it's like it's got all the basic features and no more. It's a real personality app, but it's not one I like.
Yeah. So, it needs to come forward.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at the market for third-party plugins and realize that, well, there's a list of features you could add. Yeah.
Or just look at the number of third-party apps in any category.
Yeah.
And the more of them there are, the more Apple can at least come in. On the one hand, they can say, "Oh, we're supporting developers by giving them choice, giving them room." On the other hand, you're not solving their, so many people's problems. So, there's something there too.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Indeed. Go to Indeed.com/MPU to get a free $75 credit to upgrade your job post. AI can do some incredible things, but for most jobs in your company, you need good old-fashioned carbon-based life forms, preferably a brilliant one, preferably as soon as possible. If you're looking for great minds that move the world, you can hire them with Indeed. Indeed is the job site that makes hiring as easy as 1, 2, 3. Post, screen, and interview. All of that can be done on Indeed. So get your quality shortlist of candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description faster, and only pay for the candidates that meet must-have qualifications, and schedule and complete video interviews in your Indeed dashboard. Indeed makes connecting with and hiring the right talent fast and easy, with tools like Indeed Instant Match, giving you quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description immediately, and Indeed skills tests that on average reduce hiring time by 27%. You can choose from more than 130 skills tests, then add your must-have requirements so you only pay for applicants that meet them. According to Talent Nest, Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined. If you're hiring, you need Indeed. Get started right now with a free $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/MPU. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/MPU. Once again, that's Indeed.com/MPU, and the offer is valid through June 30. Terms and conditions do apply. Our thanks to Indeed for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM. Adam, every time we have a guest on the show, we always like to put a spotlight on some of the favorite little apps and services they use that listeners may or may not have heard of. Anything on your Mac or your devices that just brings you joy and delight?
Yes. And I mean, this is so, I'm not clinical or anything, but I have a little bit of OCD. I like to have things a certain way. And so there's an app that I've been using for years, and I don't use it for hardly anything. It's it's a little app that runs on my Mac all the time. It's called Hazel. And I haven't even updated it in several versions because what I really am using it for these days, I realize this sounds petty, but I don't like the fact that there are 2 extensions for JPEGs.
Okay.
I am bothered by some things being .jpeg and other things being .jpg. And I don't even care which it is. It's got to be consistent. It drives me up the wall.
No, JPG is the one true extension.
Okay, that is true. I mean, that's how they all get edited, by Hazel.
Yeah.
So my downloads folder, my desktop folder, Hazel just watches them whenever a JPEG shows up in there with a JPEG extension, it fixes it. And
that's what you use Hazel for?
Yes, that's what I use Hazel for. The other thing that I use Hazel for at various times, I believe, and because I work with stuff on the internet all the time. I'm uploading files and stuff like that, so I need to see file name extensions. But I still don't like to see them. I realize I can set them to be visible all the time on the Mac, but then I have to see .app for all the apps, and that feels wrong to me, and that bothers me. So at various times, I have also done something with screenshots will come in a lot of the time without the file name extension being visible, and so when I'm renaming it, I'll feel the need to add the file name extension. And so one other thing that I have Hazel do is if it sees something like that, it will give it a file name extension as well.
Yeah, so you don't want .png.
Precisely.
Yeah, can't have that.
That's just wrong. And it's I've used Hazel in the past for other things as well. Various kinds of file manipulation, file renaming, and whatnot. It's a great little app, and I really should upgrade to the latest version just because I like it so much that it fixes some of these little nagging things for me. And let's see, another app that is completely different. But I've become inordinately fond of is Carrot Weather on the iPhone.
Yes.
And Josh Centers wrote about it years ago for TidBITs, but Josh is he has a different personality than I do, and the way he wrote about it was that it was like this, angry, aggressive personality, in your weather app. And I thought, why would I want that? That's horrible. And then Apple goes and buys Dark Sky, and it just kind of stagnates. I used to really like the Dark Sky app, but it doesn't have good widgets, et cetera, et cetera. It's clearly not going anywhere. So I finally decided to try Carrot because Josh likes it so much. And I discovered that it has a nice personality too, where it's actually amusing. And
Yeah.
so I have it on.
Or the ability to turn the personality off entirely.
Which is what I do.
Yeah, it turns out I like the amusing personality, when it says, hey, I think I can see the Dropbox cloud from here, things like that.
Yeah.
So any of that, it's just, I like the fact that you can tweak the UI. It just feels like everything that you could want to do with a weather app, they've done. And so, and I'm pretty weather involved, being a runner. So I spend a lot of time outside, and care deeply if I'm going to be too cold or too wet or something like that. Need to dress differently.
And you live in upstate New York, right? I mean,
where there is weather.
Yeah, weather matters where you live,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're in Southern California, I believe, where there is no weather, right? It's like sunny and 75 the whole time.
Some days it's 60, and I got to put a long sleeve shirt on, but other than that.
It's tough.
It's tough world, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Carrot Weather is another one, and then actually more recently, I've been hearkening back to the very early days of computing with recipe management. Remember when that was the thing we were all going to do with our computers?
The original database app. Recipes.
App. Yeah. So Paprika. I love Paprika, and I use it mostly on the iPhone, but obviously it syncs to my Mac and to my iPad as well. And I like the fact that I can share it with Tristan, my son Tristan, who, he's just graduated from Cornell, so he's an adult now, and cooking for himself, and he wants our recipes, because he knows what he wants to make and he needs the recipe. And this is a great way for us to, put it in and be able to share it with him. Or, he comes home for dinner, we make something nice. He's like, oh, I'd really like to try that. The recipe is just in the database that he can share. And Paprika just does such a nice job of sucking recipes in from, I subscribe to Cooks Illustrated, so I paid more and subscribed to their web access, so I can download the articles, download the recipes and things like that. And it does a really nice job of that sort of stuff. So that's, one of those apps that I've tried bunches of them over the years, and none of them have really stuck, but Paprika has become the one that I've gotten enough stuff into that now it's just like one of my cookbooks, and I have shelves of cookbooks. So
yeah, I would argue all three of your picks are best in class. I mean, the Carrot Weather is probably the best weather app. There's a funny story. The developer I think he was an English literature major. And,
no wonder I like it.
I think that's what he was. But I read a funny article about him, and he just wanted to make an app because he wasn't making any money. And I mean, he truly is like the success story that Apple was always looking for.
Yeah.
But he has put so much work into that, and adding the personality is great. But also, like, the UI innovation in that app is better than any other iPhone app, I would argue, that I've seen, to let the user really customize exactly what they want to see.
Yeah.
I wish all developers would be looking at Carrot Weather.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a really nice, I mean, he's, to get back to it, he's almost created like a HyperCard like kit. In terms of you can move stuff around and, pick the bits you want and the bits you don't want. And, that was, so you get to create your own little weather app, which is kind of neat.
Everything comes back to HyperCard.
That's right.
Stephen, I was just thinking, like, crazy Hazel rules. I mean, Adam's got a pretty good contender there. Do you have any Hazel rules that, like, just to solve some neuroses that you're just trying to get past?
I think the most ridiculous one I have is I have one that copies every screenshot I make into a Dropbox folder. And so I have a Dropbox folder with thousands of past screenshots, and it has saved me exactly twice. So maybe not super worth it, but you never know.
Actually, I just looked, and here's the other thing that my downloads and desktop folders do via Hazel. This is the other little bit of OCD extension thing. Ping comes in uppercased in iPhone screenshots and some other things. Hate that.
Yeah, PNG.
Hate that.
Yeah.
Hate that. So it lowercase is PNG.
Fixing JPEG and PNG. I was just thinking, I think I need to get a hold of Sal Segoyan. I know Hazel can be triggered on an Apple script, but I don't know if you could write an Apple script that would detect whether a document contains the Comic Sans font. I think it would be I'd make a rule that says, if someone sends me a document with Comic Sans, just delete it. It's okay. I don't even need to open it.
I think it would need to play like a toilet flushing sound so you knew it happened.
You could do that. You could do that with AppleScript. I think I need to work on that.
Of course, now we're back to Talking Moose and Oscar the Grouch and everything. So
the Talking Moose. I love that Talking Moose so much.
See, that's what Carrot Weather is like, the modern Talking Moose. We have a Talking Moose mouse pad.
Yeah. So for listeners that are not of a certain age, with the original Mac, they had this great little utility that was a talking moose. And if you go back in time, we were all coming from, operating systems that had zero personality. And the idea that your computer could have a cute little talking moose to keep you company while you're working was really something else. I mean, it was not like just a gag. It was like, whoa, you would call your friends to show them your moose. What was his name again?
Well, it was based on Bullwinkle, but is that what you're going for?
Yeah.
No, I don't think. I think it was just Talking Moose. I don't think it was just. And then the Oscar the Grouch, or the Grouch was a Mac Hack extension that a guy named Eric Shapiro wrote. That whenever you emptied the trash, Oscar the Grouch would come out of the trash can and sing his trash song.
Yeah, and then Steven, who was, I'm not even sure if he existed at that point. Still has a dog cow tattoo. So there you go.
I have a moof button. Does that count?
It's pretty close.
Yeah, given to me by a member of Apple DTS. So
that's cool.
The guy who ran ftp.apple.com.
Well, Adam, it's been too long since we had you on the show. We are definitely getting you back.
Oh, it's so much fun.
Everybody go to tidbits.com and check out everything Adam has to say. I'm sure this coming week of WWDC, you and Josh and the gang are going to have a lot of great coverage at Tidbits, and I look forward to reading it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Let me tell you about another show here on Relay FM real quick, David, before we head out. That is Clockwise. Host Dan and Micah, our friends, invite 2 guests every week from a diverse pool of tech professionals to cover 4 technology topics in just 30 minutes. This show is so much fun to be on. It's so much fun to listen to. So go to relay.fm/clockwise or search for Clockwise wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks to our sponsors, 1Password, Smile, Microsoft, and Indeed. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. If you've got thoughts on WWDC, this would be a good week to join in over at the Mac Power Users forums, which you can find at talk.macpowerusers.com. And like Steven said, we'll be coming to you early this week. So watch your feed. MPU will be back with you in a few days.